Hi, I'm William Schroeder with Just Mind Counseling, and today we have Alyssa Vanlopik with us, who's an LCSW, and we're going to be talking a little bit about her blog post, which is 5 tips for navigating a relationship with an ADHD partner. You talked about reading the book together, The ADHD Effect on Marriage, and you know, I'm curious what caused the kind of shift in your relationship after reading it as a couple.
Think for us, it was, really what I mentioned in my blog post that like having that shared language for the shared issue that we were experiencing just gave us a way to talk about something that we both were experiencing and weren't able to talk about before. So I think that shared language and understanding of what was happening just made all the difference in our ability to work through some of our challenges.
So when you talk about shared language, I realize it's something that not everybody may understand. Give me a little example of that shared language and how it changed the way that you all navigated conflict or confusion.
So, for example, one thing that was really challenging for us was relationship with time. And I would say in the neurodivergence of ADHD, there is a challenge in the relationship with time in terms of executive functioning, even. So, for example, with 2 young kids, there's always something to do 24/7, and it's felt like I was very aware of like all these things that needed to happen. And for my husband at times, like he would feel very overwhelmed by the order of events of things that need to happen: bedtime, brushing teeth, story time, all the things, right? And so at times it would look like he was kind of shut down and let's say like felt really overwhelmed by our schedule. For me, I was feeling really confused and frustrated and his seeming inability to like help out in some of the challenge. Once we realized what was happening for him when he felt really overwhelmed and he could identify that's me feeling overwhelmed because there's so much going on and I don't know where to start, it gave us that shared understanding of that experience he was having when I was otherwise confused or assuming that something else was going on for him.
I love that example, and I think that's so important because every couple has that. And that time blindness is something that absolutely happens with people with ADHD, and there's a lot of different resources that are on it. So it sounds like it's really good that you all are connecting and that to be able to kind of, I think, have that curiosity towards each other's experience to then be able to look at like, how could we approach this a little differently together so that we don't have frustration that inevitably can come when people are seeing things so differently? You talked a little bit about ADHD not being the enemy, and that's one of the different things that I can kind of take away from this. And I'm curious, what were some of the ADHD related traits that drew you to your partner, and how did your view of those things evolve over time? Because I know that's something that comes up for a lot of people, where whether it's male or female, it's like that spontaneity can be so great, but it also can mean that, there can be those different things of where it's like, oh, so you chose to bring this instead of maybe the thing we needed. Anyway, so tell me a little bit about that and how what that looks like.
So I would say definitely when we were younger in our relationship and had just met, and even just, before we had kids, like being spontaneous is one of the things that I loved. I still love this about him. I love that my husband is so spontaneous and, he could change his mind on a dime of like, actually, let's do this instead. And we can just like change course. And I love that, especially as a person who tends to be a little bit more structured, routine type A. Like that was so helpful for me and like definitely made our lives more colorful. I think like as we have more responsibilities as parents, being able to be spontaneous and that way just doesn't fit as well with our life anymore and sometimes can cause frustration. And so I think in that way, recognizing that the spontaneity is definitely something that initially drew me to my partner. And now it's something that, it has its time and its place, but it can be more challenging for us to navigate because I understand it in a different context. Like I think I can celebrate it in the moment and really like give the spontaneity its moment to shine in ways that like are fitting for our lifestyle while also working with the times where it doesn't work so well for us.
Well, thank you for sharing that because I think that that's one of those things. It's like if ADHD can be identified as the enemy, then it can create this tug of war in the relationship. Like, you mentioned that neurotypical partners have unexamined coping behaviors. What were some of yours, and how did you realize that they weren't helping?
This one, It's hard for me to admit, but I definitely developed some unhelpful and unhealthy coping mechanisms as a result of some of our dynamic with ADHD, part of which being, especially, like I said, our lives have been very crazy having kids and there's a lot of responsibilities. So my strategy had been for a while, like, I'm just going to do it all. I'll just do it all. I'll ask for help and I'm just assume I won't get it, but maybe sometimes I will. And so I started to feel pretty isolated, but also had this kind of like martyr complex come up that, like, well, I'm just doing everything. And that created even more tension for our relationship. And my husband was seeing me as like treating him like a parent, and I was feeling like I was treating him like a child. And like that was not good for our relationship. So I would say that's a very unhealthy coping mechanism that came out of us struggling in this way.
For neurotypical partners, they feel like they're doing all the work in a relationship. What advice would you have for them? It sounds like part of what you're saying, and that is, don't be the martyr, don't tell and do it all on your own, and just hold it in. Because no doubt, like holding all of that can also mean that you hold like resentment and frustration towards that person.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that has been helpful to us is noticing when I'm feeling that way and being able to reflect back to my partner how I'm feeling. I'm noticing I'm having this experience where I'm feeling like I want to take it all on because it's causing conflict. And I also know I don't want to do that because it's not good for our relationship. And so I think just being really honest about how I'm feeling instead of being passive aggressive, I'll say, like, I think the more direct I am, the better it is. And also sometimes, like when we're having some of those challenges, it might be like, hey, partner, we're struggling in this area. Why don't we schedule some time to look at our systems and see what works for us and doesn't work for us? Because systems have really saved our lives in terms of communication with these challenges. So I think scheduling a time where like we both know that we're going to talk about something to work on our relationship has been really helpful.
That's good. I like that advice. It sounds like in some ways what you're talking about is almost like, and there are a lot of couples therapists that use a similar framework of when X happened, I felt Y and I would like Z. So that way it's not blaming or finger pointing of like, when you did this, like, you're selfish, like you're going and looking at it in a very constructive lens. My next question for you would be, what systems have been game changers in your relationship? You mentioned the systems that have been helpful for you, and what has failed? And I realize that's going to be different for every ADHD couple. There's not like one single one that works for everybody, but what's been helpful for you all?
Google Calendar has like saved our lives. We put everything in a calendar invite, like even, getting a haircut or picking up the kids or need 30 minutes to myself, whatever it is. I think we both like know that that's our shared place where everything lives. And if for whatever reason we don't know what's going on that day and like don't have access to the other person, either of us being able to access that has been really helpful in terms of certain things like, let's say, grocery lists or, things that we need to discuss like travel or, upcoming events or birthdays or whatever it is. We have a shared note on our phone for different categories. One will be like weekly grocery list, one will be, upcoming travel, one will be, what insert category there. And those are kind of like talking points that we each can add to, and we set aside time weekly to like go through that list, and if we haven't gotten to it already, that's our opportunity. So I think just both of us having access to a list where we can add like these are the things that we need to talk about when we set aside that time has been helpful. So we're not like just it's not just living in our brains. We know that we'll get to it at some point.
That's really good. That sounds like you all have some good systems within that. I've seen some different couples that have like the electronic, like integrated, like big calendar that they can also see in their kitchen. So that way there's kind of the visual thing. So anyway, it's interesting seeing like what works for everybody because everybody is a little different. Some people are more paper and pencil, some are not. Anyway, so I guess the next question that I have for you is around being curious. How did you train yourself to stop assuming and start asking? Was there a specific moment that made this shift urgent or allowed you to shift to that perspective?
I honestly think once I read this book and we shared this book together, it really just that would be the moment for me that things changed and I was able to be more curious. Would say like as a counselor, that is like I would say inherently I have a lot of curiosity and like not proud to admit that I was not practicing that with my partner as much as I would like to be. So I think it was just a reminder of like, my partner is also a human too. He's not just my partner. And like, I need to be curious with him. And reading this book definitely helped me to take that step back and see that like I can practice that like compassion and curiosity even when I'm feeling frustrated by the situation.
And I think it's actually a helpful reminder that, like, I think people can look at therapists and be like, oh, we're the like perfect people. And the reality is we make mistakes too, right? And so I think it's that good reminder for everybody in their relationships to know, like, it's not about doing it perfectly. It's just ultimately trying to do it better. Like that saying is perfection is the enemy of progress is a really good point, just because it is about trying to look at like how we can continue to improve. Anyway, you've kind of like hinted on this, and you don't have to answer this if it feels like we've already done this, but like, what does perspective taking look like in your relationship and, in that tough moment?
I think perspective taking, especially in the like because we've had more shared language in what's happening for him in certain moments and what's happening for me. For me, when I'm perspective taking in a moment where there's tension, kind of is like kind of like take a step back from what we're experiencing as a couple and I can observe some of like the nonverbals of what I see going on for my partner and it just allows me to like take some hints of like this might be a tough moment for this person or for my partner specifically, but like just noticing, what's going on for him helps me to take a step back and like kind of look at it from what is he feeling right now? Because I can get really stuck. And I think naturally we all get kind of stuck in our own experience and it makes it hard to see what's going on for somebody else. But taking that, I guess like taking like a pulse check on like what's going on in the situation can help me to like get out of my own perspective and see what else is happening here.
That's good. Because I think it's important to kind of like look at like what's going well, what's a challenge, and trying to like share perspectives on kind of how that is for each of us. Because none of us want to be in that zone of kind of like you said before, feeling that we're managing somebody else. It can be easy for the system to slide into that of where one person is, I think, taking a greater balance of kind of the management of things. And I think then both people can feel lonely. And so it's important to try and look at what does that need to be like in our relationship to keep that spark alive and that balance alive, because it can easily shift that way. But and kind of closing in the last two questions that I have for you. What would you tell your past self before you understood ADHD in relationships? What would be kind of the advice that your future self has for your past self about this?
Oh gosh, what a good question. I think my future self or this self would have said to past Alyssa, like, you don't have to do it all alone. Like, and this is not helpful for you or for your relationship. And so, like, take time to take care of yourself and to build out space to communicate with your partner in a meaningful way. So I think, naturally I just started to retreat and take on that martyr complex, and that wasn't helpful for anyone. So I would just tell Alyssa to like take a beat, take care of yourself.
And then finally, what's the most misunderstood part of being in a neurodiverse partnership from your point of view?
I think one of the most misunderstood parts, or I guess from my perspective, one of the most misunderstood parts is that the ADHD partner is responsible for fixing themselves so that the relationship gets better. And I think that just creates more isolation, more loneliness, more tension, more resentment. And so I think it's just so important that both partners realize they're committed to each other, regardless of neurodivergence. And it's an effort on both ends.